story takes place in the wilderness of Exodus. But it doesn't begin there. It begins in Egypt. Before Moses returned to Pharaoh, before the frogs rained down from the sky, before the sea split in two, revealing dry land, the story, this one we hear today, this day of all days, World Communion Sunday, this story begins not with life in the wilderness, but life in one of the ancient world's crown jewels of civilization, Egypt. Here in our story, is Israel starving? When we find them in this story, are they in danger? In danger of not being able to feed their children themselves? There's nothing here to answer that question, not truly. Are they starving or are they just miserable? Afraid, perhaps. Do we believe them or not? But the story takes them at face value. Starving or miserable, either way, that's not for us to say, but the Hebrews now think in the wilderness, they are dying of hunger. They are hungry and looking now to a dismal future as they reflect on what has become of themselves here in this place, now where they believe they will die. Starvation thrives in the shadows. In all those places we choose not to look, but it's far from a hidden death. Sunken eyes and hollowed cheeks, brittle hair, shaking, fainting, swelling of the legs and the belly like we've seen in those photos of small children with disproportionately swollen bellies. They complain, they lament, they cry out to Moses and Aaron, the Hebrews do, that God has brought them out there. And not the scripture, but my own translation. I hear them saying, "Look at me! Look at us. If you were going to kill us, you could have done it in Egypt. At least in Egypt, our children would have been fed." In Egypt, that's where the story really begins. In the history of the ancient world, few could even come close or match Egypt, from their first pharaoh named Narmer, who unites the kingdom, to Khufu, who commissioned free Egyptians, not slaves, to build his tomb we know as the Great Pyramid. The first female pharaoh, Hatshepsut, the great Imhotep III, who commissioned massive granite sculptures of himself. And then the most well-known of all pharaohs, Ramses II, who saw those nice statues of Imhotep III and decided, you know what, that looks a whole lot like me. And he rebranded them and put his name on it. He ruled longer than any pharaoh in all of Egypt's 3,000 years of civilization. Even the most minor of rulers, like King Tut, a name we know, but a short very span, he reigned for just a blink of an eye compared to those 3,000 years of civilization. And even he knew, like every pharaoh before him, that the civilization that we could still find standing today rested always on two great pillars, the first being that great desert to the west, and the second being the Nile River, flowing and flooding. It was practically divine in its own right. The western desert offered its protection, but the Nile River was their provision. For 20 years, with a rotating crew of about 10,000 laborers at a time, Egyptians, again, not slaves, but Egyptians, hauled 6 million tons of limestone. They transported granite blocks as heavy as 50 tons, 500 miles north to Giza. Masons used only copper tools to shape the blocks, and doing so with such scientific precision that it still strikes us. And there beside them, blacksmiths, forging and reforging that copper each and every day. For 20 years, I bring this up, they built the pyramid, and the Nile River fed them all. Scripture says that Pharaoh had not only storehouses, but it says that he had storehouse cities erected. Temples and their priests were responsible for the distribution of food, and it was not all equal, but everyone was fed. Why? Because Pharaoh said so. Pharaoh kept everyone fed. Pharaoh kept the people fed. And feeding the state-owned slaves kept them compliant. Turning food into a weapon is as much a hallmark of civilization as any art or any pyramid. Pharaoh fed them, and the Hebrews complied. They might have been free to go, but to where? Desert to the west, and of course, meat and grain and bread and beer here. Death to the west, and full stomachs here, enslaved. They might have been free to leave, but they had nowhere to go. They sold their property to Egypt generations ago, long before Moses said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." At that point, they had nowhere to go. But what they did have is full bellies here in Egypt, enslaved. So before manna falls from the sky and the Hebrews are told of this promised land, it seems right that you and I pause here on World Communion Sunday to name the truth that the weaponization of food does not solely belong to the pages of history. In fact, it thrives. It's only getting worse. The ancient and modern world alike both knew famine, food insecurity, supply and production issues, the complexities of social and civil realities in keeping the people fed. But in 2025, right here, right now, there is more hunger, more famine, more insecurity, more supply and production issues, more civil and social realities that keep people hungry than any other time in human history. It seems advances leap forward daily. Daily people will die because they do not have food or access to food or money to buy the food that there is. And while disasters, of course, and droughts and diseases contribute, the great evil here in this story is almost exclusively made with these two hands, like yours and mine. Many will die by the realities that have been created by greed and wars and religious zeal and inaction, especially inaction. The divide that separates those who hunger and those who want for nothing is greater today than it ever was for the slaves of Egypt, now crying out in the wilderness. In the story, the divide between the lowest of low and the highest of high, even Pharaoh himself, pales in comparison to the divide today between the hungry poor and the staggering 1.5 trillion with a T dollars that rests in the very same hands as yours and mine, but 1.5 trillion in 5 men alone. I'm told that even the warlords know that they could feed the children. It's just a matter of choice. The same with the greedy who sit atop their hoard. The same is true for any one of the top 5 richest men in the world. I looked it up, over 3,000 billionaires worldwide, but they cannot touch the top 5. And any of them today could just walk in front of a camera, clear his throat, and announce to the world that he will eradicate hunger worldwide. It takes lots of money, yeah, right? Lots of money. Here's the thing. They have it. The choice is the same. To them, the billionaires, to the warlord, knowing they can, but will they? So I wonder, what should we do if they do one day? But more importantly, what should we do if they do not today? You know, even when told to make bricks without straw, the Hebrews had food. Even if the whims of the rulers could spell certain death, they always had something to eat. Even when remembering the worst, the Hebrews' bellies were full. And now the story tells us that they're not. They don't quite say it, but it props up their lament. They make a comparison. Did you hear it? Between God and Pharaoh, between this wilderness in Egypt, between being beholden and free. They don't say it outright, but it's there. You heard it. If only we had died by the hands of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out in this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. You can hear the quiet part out loud. They want God to be like Pharaoh. So that's what God does. Pharaoh fed his slaves. Now God will feed God's people. Pharaoh fed his slaves, and now God will feed the Hebrews. Manna from heaven, quails by the thousand. Once again, they can sit around pots of meat. Once again, they can eat bread to their fill. Once again, they seem to expect that death continues to hover over their head. But at least they're not hungry. This story, Manna, is a crisis for the Hebrews. It's a problem of freedom without any equal in all of captivity. It falls from above, it covers the earth. The quail sent from above, it covers the earth. Still a crisis. For the first time, the glory of the Lord appears before Israel, before the Hebrews. God tells Moses about the quail and the manna, and their eyes have seen the glory of God, but it all is still a crisis. They will be given the bounty of the earth. They will be given the miracle of heaven and sent out at twilight and then again in the morning to gather. It's the instruction. The crisis is the instruction. God now seeks something greater from them and from us, something greater than a pharaonic level of compliance. So God gives them freedom to them and to you to reap, and the experience of the folly of greed. In our story today, there is enough. In our story today, there's always enough. And you will see that tomorrow. The day after, that's when you will have to choose to remember it. You see, friends, the crisis of manna is that God is not Pharaoh. God doesn't seek slaves. God creates a people. These people who will one day enter a land flowing with milk and honey, called the Promised Land, and there they'll be given a choice. Will they gather only enough for their household? Will they keep only what is needed? Will they remember the abundance of the daily bread? Or will we become their own little Pharaoh? When this land they will enter is as fertile as the Nile, and it produces enough for their own storehouses and their own power to weaponize them, just as they've seen before. Friends, the crisis of manna is that freedom from want does not or will not mean equality unless you choose to reap only enough, unless you choose to keep only what you need and believe that's how God will care for both of you and for everyone else. The most uncomfortable part of the story, I'd say, is that. Daily bread, it's manna to be found here and now. But will you choose to take only what you need? Will you choose to remember that anything beyond that will ultimately spoil? That is the great sin of this story and of today. To have so much that it spoils when you and I and them and us together can do so much more. The great sin of this story is the waste that comes when you and I and them and us choose to do nothing.